The Texas sun beat mercilessly on the dusty ground of San Antonio's Main Street as Ayanna walked with measured steps toward the saloon. At 28, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of her Apache heritage. Though her traditional dress had long been traded for a simple brown skirt and white blouse that marked her as someone caught between two worlds. The drought had lasted 3 brutal years. Her people's crops had withered, their livestock had died, and the government rations barely kept children from crying at night. When Marcus Black Iron Delacroix rode into their settlement with his men, his offer seemed like salvation wrapped in a devil's bargain. "Your daughter," he had told her father in broken Spanish, his cold gray eyes never leaving Ayanna's face, "for enough gold to feed your people through the winter, and spring, and the summer after that." Now 3 days later, she stood outside the Broken Wheel Saloon where Delacroix waited. The 40-year-old gunslinger's reputation preceded him like a shadow. Men crossed streets to avoid him. Sheriffs looked the other way when he rode through town, and decent women shuttered their windows when his black horse appeared on the horizon. Through the bat-wing doors, she could see him at a corner table, counting gold coins with the methodical patience of a man who always got what he paid for. His matched Colts hung at his sides like promises of violence, and his scarred hands moved with the precision of someone who had never lost a draw. "Miss Ayanna." The voice behind her was gentle, respectful. She turned to see Jake Morrison, a local cowboy who worked the ranches outside town. At 38, his weathered face bore the honest lines of a man who earned his living under the open sky. His blue eyes held something she hadn't seen in weeks, genuine concern. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly, his hat in his hands. "There are other ways to help your people." Ayanna looked at him for a long moment. She had noticed him before, how he always tipped his hat when he saw her in town, how he spoke to everyone with the same courteous respect, how he never stared like other men did. But kindness wouldn't feed starving children. "The gold is already counted, Mr. Morrison," she replied, her English careful but clear. "My father's word is given." "A man's word shouldn't cost a woman's freedom," Jake said, stepping closer. "That ain't right, and you know it." Before she could respond, the saloon doors burst open. Marcus Delacroix stepped into the afternoon light, his presence immediately drawing attention from everyone on the street. Conversation stopped mid-sentence, horses shifted nervously, and somewhere a dog began to whimper. "My bride," he said, his voice carrying the lazy confidence of absolute power, "seems to be having second thoughts." His eyes fixed on Jake with the cold assessment of a predator sizing up prey. "And you are?" Jake straightened, his hand instinctively moving closer to his own gun, a working man's weapon, worn but well-maintained. "Jake Morrison, and I'm thinking maybe the lady deserves a choice in this matter." Delacroix's laugh was like ice cracking. "Choice?" He gestured toward the gold visible through the saloon doors. "I've already paid for my choice, cowboy. Question is, are you prepared to pay for yours?" The street fell silent except for the whisper of wind through the dust. Ayanna felt her heart racing as she realized what was about to happen. Jake Morrison, this gentle cowboy who owed her nothing, was about to challenge the most feared gunslinger in 3 territories. "Jake," she whispered urgently. "Don't." But Jake's eyes never left Delacroix. "What if I am?" The gunslinger's smile was razor thin. "Then I suggest you make your peace with whatever God you pray to, Morrison. Because tomorrow at noon, right here in this street, we settle this the only way it can be settled." As Delacroix turned and walked back into the saloon, Ayanna stared at Jake in shock. In all her life, no man had ever risked anything for her choice, her freedom, her right to say no. The question was, would his courage be enough to survive what was coming? That evening, Jake sat alone on the porch of Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, cleaning his revolver by lamplight. The weathered Colt .45 had belonged to his father, carried through the war between the states and countless cattle drives since. It wasn't fancy like Delacroix's matched pistols, but it had never failed him when it mattered. "You've gone and lost your mind, Jake Morrison." He looked up to see Sheriff Tom Burkhart approaching, his badge catching the flickering light. Burkhart was a good man, but he'd learned long ago that some problems were bigger than the law could handle. "Maybe so," Jake replied, continuing to oil the cylinder. "But a man's got to draw the line somewhere." "Delacroix has killed 18 men in fair fights," Burkhart said, settling into the chair beside him. 18, Jake, and those are just the ones folks know about. He's got hands like lightning and a heart made of stone. I know what he is, Tom. Do you? The sheriff leaned forward. You know about the widow in Amarillo who tried to keep her land when he wanted it? You know about the preacher in El Paso who spoke against him? They're all in the ground now, Jake. All legal, all witnesses, all fair and square according to the code of the West. Jake paused in his cleaning. What about the Apache girl? She got any say in this fair and square business? Before Burkhart could answer, soft footsteps approached through the darkness. Ayanna emerged from the shadows, a woven basket in her hands. She had changed into traditional Apache dress, deerskin decorated with intricate beadwork that caught the light like captured stars. I brought you food, she said simply, setting the basket on the small table between them. If tomorrow happens, you should not be hungry. Sheriff Burkhart stood awkwardly. I'll leave you folks to talk. He paused at the steps. Jake, there's no shame in leaving town tonight. No shame at all. After he left, Ayanna sat in the chair Burkhart had vacated. For several moments, neither spoke. The night sounds of San Antonio drifted around them. Distant music from the cantinas, the lowing of cattle in the pens, the lonely whistle of a train somewhere in the darkness. Why? She asked finally. Jake looked at her, taking in the proud set of her shoulders, the intelligence in her dark eyes, the quiet strength that emanated from her like heat from a forge. Because some things are worth fighting for. You don't know me. I know enough. He set down his gun and turned to face her fully. I know you walk to the mercantile every week to buy supplies for folks who can't get to town themselves. I know you helped Doc Peterson when the fever came through the Mexican quarter, even though white folks looked at you sideways for it. I know you've got a smile that could light up the whole territory, though I haven't seen it much lately. Ayanna was quiet for a long moment. The gold will feed my people through winter. Without it, children will be hungry. Old ones will. She couldn't finish the sentence. There are other ways to help them, Jake said gently. Ways that don't require you to sacrifice yourself to a man like Delacroix. Such as what? You think the government will suddenly care about Apache children? You think the ranchers will offer work to people they see as threats? Jake had no easy answer for that, and his silence spoke volumes. They both knew the harsh realities of Texas in 1880, the prejudices that ran deep, the economic struggles that pitted survival against dignity every day. If you win tomorrow, Ayanna said quietly, what then? Delacroix's gold goes with him. My people still starve. Jake reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. He poured the contents into his palm. It wasn't much, perhaps $50 in coins and a few small nuggets from his prospecting days. Everything he owned in the world. It's not much, he said, offering it to her. But it's honest money. And there's more where it came from if we work together to find solutions. Ayanna stared at the money, then at his face. You would give me everything you have? For your freedom? Yes, ma'am. She was quiet for so long that Jake began to think she wouldn't respond. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. In my tribe, we have a saying. The bravest warriors are not those who feel no fear, but those who act despite it. She met his eyes. I see your hands shaking, Jake Morrison. I see the fear in your eyes when you think I'm not looking. But I also see something else. What's that? A good man. She stood, leaving the money untouched on the table. Tomorrow, if you still live, we will find another way. Together. As she disappeared into the darkness, Jake sat back in his chair and resumed cleaning his gun. His hands were indeed shaking, but not from fear of death. They shook because, for the first time in his adult life, he had something worth living for. In the distance, a church bell tolled midnight. Noon was only 12 hours away. In the Broken Wheel Saloon, Marcus Delacroix sat at his usual table, a bottle of imported whiskey untouched before him. Unlike most men facing a gunfight, he felt no need for liquid courage. He had never needed anything to steady his hand except the cold certainty of his own skill. Boss. Ray Sullivan, his lieutenant, approached the table. Sullivan was a thin, nervous man who had survived 5 years riding with Delacroix by knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. Tonight he spoke. The cowboy's been asking around town about you, talking to folks who've seen you draw. And what are they telling him? Delacroix's voice was casual, but Sullivan caught the dangerous undertone. Truth, mostly. About Amarillo. About El Paso. About the mining camp up in Colorado. Sullivan paused. Some folks are saying he's crazy to face you. Some folks are right. Delacroix poured a small measure of whiskey but didn't drink it. What else? The Apache girl spent an hour with him tonight. Brought him food. This got Delacroix's attention. His gray eyes lifted from the glass to fix on Sullivan's face. Did she now? Yes, sir. Looked like they had quite the conversation. Delacroix was quiet for several minutes, his fingers drumming silently on the wooden table. He had built his reputation on reading people, on understanding their weaknesses and exploiting them. Jake Morrison was proving more complex than expected. Tell me about this cowboy, he said finally. Sullivan consulted a small notebook he always carried. Jacob Morrison, age 38. Worked ranches from here to Montana. No family that anyone knows of. Keeps to himself mostly, but folks respect him. Never been married, never been in trouble with the law. Fighting experience? None that shows. Some bar scuffles, nothing more. Word is he's a decent shot, but nothing special. Delacroix nodded slowly. In his experience, men like Morrison, decent, hard-working, unremarkable, rarely lasted 10 seconds in a real gunfight. They confused target practice with facing another human being who was trying to kill them. They thought courage was enough to overcome skill and experience. They were almost always wrong. There's something else, boss. Sullivan's voice carried a note of uncertainty. What? The girl, Ayanna, she's been asking questions too. About Morrison? About you. Delacroix's expression didn't change, but Sullivan noticed his drumming fingers go still. What kind of questions? About the widow in Amarillo. About what really happened there. For the first time that evening, Delacroix lifted the whiskey to his lips and drank. The widow in Amarillo had been a complication. A woman who wouldn't sell her land for any price, whose husband's will had left her well protected legally. He had solved the problem in the most direct way possible, but there had been details that never made it into the official reports, and what did she learn? Enough to know that the widow's husband didn't die of fever like the official report said. Delacroix was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, the cold, thin smile that had been the last thing many men ever saw. Interesting. The little Apache is more resourceful than I gave her credit for. He stood, his movements fluid and controlled. Sullivan, send word to the boys. I want them in town tomorrow morning. All of them. For a simple gunfight. Simple? Delacroix's laugh was like winter wind. My friend, there is nothing simple about a woman who starts asking the right questions. Tomorrow isn't just about killing a cowboy anymore. It's about making sure everyone in this town remembers why they don't interfere with Marcus Delacroix's business. As Sullivan hurried to carry out his orders, Delacroix walked to the window and looked out at the moonlit street. Somewhere out there, Jake Morrison was probably sitting awake, cleaning his gun and trying to convince himself he could win. Somewhere else, Ayanna was learning truths that could be dangerous for her to know. Tomorrow at noon, he would solve both problems permanently. But as he stood there in the darkness, Marcus Delacroix felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a small nagging doubt. Not about his ability to outdraw Morrison, but about what the Apache woman might do with the knowledge she was gathering. In his long and violent career, he had learned to fear only one thing more than a man with a gun, a woman with information and nothing left to lose. Outside, the church bell tolled 1 o'clock. 11 hours remained. As the first pale light of dawn crept across San Antonio, Ayanna made her way through the Mexican quarter toward a small adobe house on the edge of town. She moved quietly, her moccasins silent on the dusty streets, avoiding the main thoroughfares where early risers might see her and ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. Elena Vasquez answered the door at Ayanna's soft knock. The elderly Mexican woman had been a midwife and healer for 40 years, and her wrinkled hands had delivered half the babies in 3 counties. More importantly for Ayanna's purposes, Elena had connections throughout the territory, and a memory that missed nothing. Mija, Elena whispered, pulling her inside. What brings you here so early? I need to know about Amarillo, Ayanna said without preamble. About the widow named Sarah Whitmore. Elena's expression grew grave. She poured coffee from a pot on her stove and handed a cup to Ayanna before settling into her rocking chair. Why do you want to know about such dark things? Because in 6 hours a good man is going to die trying to protect me from Marcus Delacroix, unless I can find another way. Elena rocked slowly, her weathered hands wrapped around her coffee cup. Finally she spoke. Sarah Whitmore was my prima, my cousin. She married a rancher up in Amarillo, good man named David. When he died, supposedly of fever, she inherited his ranch. Very valuable land, right where the railroad wanted to build. Supposedly? David was healthy as a horse when I saw him 3 weeks before his death. No fever, no sickness. But when Sarah found his body, there were signs. What kind of signs? Elena set down her coffee and looked directly at Ayanna. Bruises on his throat. And a smell. A smell? Like bitter almonds. My grandmother taught me about such things. There are plants, seeds that can kill a man and leave that smell. But Sarah was too afraid to speak. Too afraid of what might happen to her if she accused the wrong person. Ayanna felt her heart racing. What happened to her? Delacroix came calling, offering to buy the ranch for half its value. When she refused, he was very persistent. Visited every week, always with his men, always making it clear what could happen to a woman alone on such a big spread. But she still refused? Sarah was strong, stubborn. She had lawyers, had money to fight him in court. Elena's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Until she didn't. What do you mean? The challenge came on a Tuesday. Delacroix accused her of cheating at cards in the saloon, a lie since Sarah never gambled. But he had witnesses, all his men, all swearing they saw her marking cards. In those days, such accusations, a woman had to accept a champion to fight for her honor or be branded a cheat and run out of town. Ayanna's blood ran cold. She had to find someone to fight for her. See? An old man, Sarah's foreman, stood up for her. Good man, but 70 years old and nearly blind in one eye. Elena's voice grew bitter. The fight lasted less than 10 seconds. And after, Sarah sold the ranch to Delacroix for exactly what he had originally offered. She left Amarillo that same day and was never seen again. Ayanna sat in stunned silence. The pattern was becoming clear. Delacroix didn't just take what he wanted through intimidation. He used the code of the West itself, twisting honor and tradition to serve his purposes. Challenge a woman's reputation, force her to find a champion, then eliminate the champion in a legal gunfight. Elena, she said carefully, if someone could prove David Whitmore was murdered, the statute hasn't run out, Elena confirmed. Murder has no time limit. But proof, she shook her head. Sarah's gone, the witnesses are all afraid, and dead men tell no tales. What about the coroner's report? Burned in a fire 3 months after David's death. Very convenient fire, some said. Ayanna stood, her mind racing. There had to be something. Some thread she could pull to unravel Delacroix's carefully constructed facade. There is one thing, Elena said quietly. David's brother lives in Fort Worth, Thomas Whitmore. He's a Texas Ranger, and he never believed the fever story. He's been asking questions for 3 years, waiting for someone brave enough to talk. Or foolish enough, Ayanna murmured. Sometimes, mija, brave and foolish are the same thing. Elena stood and pressed something into Ayanna's hand, a small silver locket. This belonged to Sarah. She left it with me before she fled Amarillo, said if anything ever happened to her, I should make sure her story was told. Ayanna opened the locket. Inside was a tiny photograph of a young woman with sad eyes, and tucked behind it, a folded piece of paper covered in careful handwriting. Her testimony, Elena explained. Everything she suspected but was too afraid to say in court. Names, dates, details about David's death. As Ayanna read the faded ink, her hands began to tremble. Sarah Whitmore had documented everything. Her husband's suspicious death, Delacroix's threats, the witnesses who had been paid to lie about her card playing, even the name of the plant extract that left the bitter almond smell. Why didn't you take this to the authorities? Elena's laugh was bitter. Who would listen to an old Mexican woman accusing a famous gunslinger? Who would believe word against Marcus Delacroix? But now? Now you have a choice, mija. You can use this to maybe save your cowboy's life, if you can get it to the right people in time. Or you can let him die a hero's death and marry Delacroix as planned. Ayanna closed the locket carefully and slipped it into her dress. Through Elena's window she could see the sun climbing, higher in the eastern sky. 4 hours until noon. 4 hours to find a way to use Sarah Whitmore's truth to save Jake, Morrison's life, and her own freedom. Elena, she said, I need to send a telegram to Fort Worth immediately. The old woman smiled grimly. I was hoping you would say that, mija. Let's go wake up the telegraph operator. As they stepped out into the growing morning light, Neither woman noticed the figure watching from the shadows across the street. Ray Sullivan, who had been following Ayanna since dawn on his boss's orders. The game was about to change. But Marcus Delacroix always stayed one move ahead. The telegraph office was closed, but Elena knew where the operator lived. Within 20 minutes, they had roused Herbert Finch from his bed and convinced him to open the office early. Elena's reputation as the woman who had delivered his own children, carrying considerable weight in the argument. Ayanna composed her message carefully, knowing that every word would cost precious money and that brevity was essential. Ranger Thomas Whitmore, Fort Worth stop have evidence regarding Brother David's death, 1877. Stop Marcus Delacroix, Amarillo gunfight today noon San Antonio. Stop witness testimony and proof available. Stop urgent response needed. Ayanna Silva Broken Wheel Saloon. That'll be $2, Finch said. Counting the words, Ayanna reached for her small purse, but Elena waved her away. My money, mija. For Sarah's memory. As Finch tapped out the message on his telegraph key, Ayanna paced the small office. Outside, San Antonio was waking up. She could hear the morning sounds. Roosters crowing, horses snorting, the distant whistle of the early freight train. Normal sounds of a normal day, except that in 3 hours, Jake Morrison would walk into the street to face almost certain death. Message sent, Finch announced. If Ranger Whitmore is in Fort Worth, he should get it within the hour. And if he's not? Finch shrugged. Then it'll wait for him, I suppose. That's all we can do. As they left the telegraph office, Ayanna felt a strange mixture of hope and desperation. She had set something in motion, but would it be enough? And would it happen in time? Now what? Elena asked. Now I need to find Jake and tell him what I've learned. Maybe if he knows the truth about Delacroix, he can use it somehow. They walked quickly toward the center of town, but as they turned onto Main Street, Ayanna stopped abruptly. Standing in front of Mrs. Henderson's boarding house were 4 men she didn't recognize. Hard-looking men with tied-down guns and the lazy confidence of professional fighters. Delacroix's men, Elena whispered. He's brought them all to town. One of the men noticed Ayanna looking and nudged his companion. Within seconds, all 4 were watching her with the predatory attention of wolves circling prey. The back way, Elena said urgently, through the alley. But as they turned to go, Ray Sullivan stepped out of a doorway directly in front of them. Morning, ladies, he said with a cold smile. Boss wants to see you, Miss Silva. I have nothing to say to your boss. That's where you're wrong. Sullivan moved closer, and Ayanna could see the butt of his pistol protruding from his jacket. You see, we know about your little morning activities. The visit to Elena here, the telegram you sent. Boss is very interested in what you might have told that Texas Ranger. Elena stepped protectively in front of Ayanna. You leave her alone, Sullivan. She's done nothing wrong. Wrong? Sullivan laughed. Lady, she's about to marry my boss in 3 hours. I'd say interfering with that constitutes something wrong. She's not married yet, Elena said firmly. And she has the right to send whatever telegram she wants. Sullivan's hand moved to his gun. Not anymore, she doesn't. The confrontation might have escalated, but at that moment a new voice cut through the tension like a knife. Is there a problem here? Jake Morrison had appeared at the end of the alley, and Ayanna felt her heart skip. He looked calm, composed, but she could see the alertness in his eyes, the way his hand rested casually near his weapon. Sullivan turned to face him, his own gun half drawn. Just collecting what belongs to my boss, cowboy. Nothing that concerns you. See, that's where you're wrong, Jake said, walking slowly forward. His voice was conversational, but there was steel underneath. The lady concerns me very much, and I don't recall anyone asking her what she wanted to do. What she wants doesn't matter anymore. She's bought and paid for? Is she? Jake looked directly at Ayanna. That how you see it, Miss Silva? Before she could answer, Sullivan made his move. His gun cleared leather fast, faster than most men could follow. But Jake was already moving, had been moving since the moment he saw Sullivan's intention in his eyes. The report of Jake's Colt echoed off the adobe walls of the alley. Sullivan staggered backward, looking down in surprise at his right shoulder, where blood was beginning to seep through his shirt. His own gun lay in the dust 3 feet away. You shot me, Sullivan gasped. In the shoulder, Jake confirmed. Could have been the heart, but I figured you might want to reconsider your approach to the situation. The sound of running feet announced the arrival of Sullivan's companions. but Jake had already helped Ayanna and Elena to step behind him. His gun remained steady in his hand, trained on Sullivan but ready to shift to any new threat. "Stand down." The voice cracked with authority, and everyone turned to see Sheriff Burkhart approaching with 2 deputies all armed with shotguns. "What's the situation here, Jake?" "This gentleman was interfering with a lady's right to move freely through town," Jake replied calmly. "I suggested he reconsider his methods." Burkhart looked at Sullivan, who was now being supported by his companions. Blood continued to seep through his fingers as he pressed them to his shoulder. "Ray Sullivan," Burkhart said with disgust. "Should have known. You and your friends need medical attention, and then you need to get out of my town." "Boss ain't gonna like this," one of the other gunmen warned. "Your boss can discuss it with me personally," Burkhart replied. "At noon, if he's still planning on keeping that appointment." As Sullivan's men helped him toward the doctor's office, Jake holstered his gun and turned to Ayanna. "Are you hurt?" "No, but Jake, we need to talk. I've learned things about Delacroix, about what he's really done." "Later," Jake said, glancing at the growing crowd of townspeople who had gathered at the sound of gunfire. "Right now, you need to get somewhere safe." This little altercation just changed the stakes considerably. He was right. By shooting one of Delacroix's men, Jake had essentially declared war. The noon gunfight would no longer be a simple matter of honor. It would be personal. As Elena led Ayanna toward the Mexican Quarter in safety, Ayanna looked back to see Jake standing alone in the dusty alley, reloading his gun with methodical precision. In 2 hours, he would face the most dangerous gunslinger in 3 territories. But now, thanks to her investigation, Marcus Delacroix would be facing him with murder on his mind and wounded pride in his heart. Somehow, that didn't feel like an improvement. At 10:30 a.m., Herbert Finch's telegraph key began chattering with an incoming message. He transcribed it quickly, recognizing the urgency in the rapid fire. Morse code: Ayanna Silva, San Antonio, stop have been. Tracking Delacroix. 3 years, stop your evidence. Crucial stop. Departing Fort Worth immediately but cannot arrive. Before evening, stop. Do not let gunfight proceed. Stop. Repeat. Do not let gunfight proceed. Stop. Have federal warrant being issued. Stop. Thomas Whitmore, Texas Rangers. Finch read the message twice, then grabbed his hat and ran for the door. This was bigger than a simple gunfight over a woman. This was a federal matter, and he needed to get this telegram to the sheriff immediately. Meanwhile, in the back room of Dr. Peterson's office, Ray Sullivan sat grimacing as the doctor cleaned and bandaged his shoulder wound. Marcus Delacroix stood nearby, his face a mask of cold fury. "How bad?" Delacroix asked. "He'll live," Peterson replied without looking up. "Clean through the shoulder, missed the bone. He'll be sore for a few weeks, but no permanent damage." Delacroix nodded curtly and gestured for Sullivan to follow him outside. Despite his injury, Sullivan obeyed immediately. He knew better than to keep his boss waiting when he was in this mood. "Tell me again what the girl was doing this morning." Delacroix said once they were alone behind the doctor's office. Visited the old Mexican woman, Elena Vasquez. They went to the telegraph office together, sent a message to Fort Worth, addressed to someone named Thomas Whitmore. Delacroix went very still. "Thomas Whitmore?" "Yes, sir." "Mean something to you?" "It means, my friend, that our little Apache has been busier than we thought." Delacroix's voice was deadly quiet. "Thomas Whitmore is David Whitmore's brother. He's also a Texas Ranger who has been trying to prove I killed his brother for 3 years. Sullivan's face paled. "What do we do?" "We accelerate our timeline." Delacroix checked his pocket watch. "Gather the boys. We're not waiting until noon. But boss, you challenged Morrison to noon. If you change the terms now, folks might think, I don't care what folks think." Delacroix snapped. "In 1 hour, maybe 2, this town is going to be crawling with Texas Rangers. I want Morrison dead, the girl in my custody, and all of us gone before that happens. What about the townspeople? They'll talk." Delacroix's smile was arctic. "Not if they know what's good for them." At the same moment across town, Sheriff Burkhart was reading Thomas Whitmore's telegram with growing alarm. He looked up at Herbert Finch, who stood fidgeting in front of his desk. "This changes everything, Herbert. Where's Jake Morrison now? Last I saw, he was at the boarding house getting ready for the fight. And the girl? Don't know for certain, but I think the old Mexican woman took her somewhere safe." Burkhart stood and checked his shotgun. "Find my deputies. Tell them to arm themselves and meet me at Main Street. Then get word to Jake. Tell him the fight's off. Federal law's involved now." "Yes, sir." "Sheriff? What?" What if Delacroix doesn't want to wait for the Rangers? Burkhart paused at the door. Then God help us all, Herbert. God help us all. 10 minutes later, Jake was cleaning his gun one final time when young Tommy Henderson, Mrs. Henderson's nephew, burst into his room. Mr. Morrison, Sheriff says the fight's off. Federal law's involved now. Jake looked up sharply. What do you mean, federal law? Texas Rangers are coming. Something about evidence against Delacroix for murder. Tommy was breathless from running. Sheriff says you're to stay put until... The boy's words were cut off by the sound of breaking glass from downstairs. Then Mrs. Henderson's scream echoed through the boarding house. Jake was on his feet instantly, gun in hand. Tommy, get under the bed and stay there no matter what you hear. He moved to the window and looked down at the street. What he saw made his blood run cold. 4 of Delacroix's men had surrounded the boarding house, while others were taking positions across the street. This wasn't going to be a fair fight at noon. This was going to be a massacre right now. Morrison! Delacroix's voice carried clearly through the broken front window. I know you're in there. Come out now and maybe the old woman doesn't get hurt. Jake could hear Mrs. Henderson whimpering downstairs. The elderly widow had given him a place to stay when he first came to San Antonio, had treated him like the son she'd never had. Now she was in danger because of him. What do you want, Delacroix? Jake called out the window. What I've always wanted, what belongs to me. The girl and you dead. Simple enough terms. The girl's not here. No, but she'll come running when she hears the shooting start. Women are predictable that way. Jake felt trap closing around him. Delacroix had outmaneuvered them all. Instead of waiting for a fair fight that federal law might interrupt, he was forcing a confrontation on his own terms, using innocent people as bait. You've got 5 seconds, Morrison. Then we start burning the place down with the old woman inside. Jake made his decision. He couldn't win against 4 professional gunmen in a straight fight, but maybe he could buy enough time for help to arrive. Sheriff Burkhart had to be on his way, and if the Rangers were really coming... All right, he called out. I'm coming down, but I want your word that Mrs. Henderson goes free. You're in no position to make demands, cowboy. Maybe not, but I'm the one you want. Dead or alive, I'm no good to you if this place burns down before you can prove you beat me fair and square. There was a pause. Jake was counting on Delacroix's arrogance, his need to maintain the facade of honorable gunfighting that protected him from legal consequences. Fair point, Delacroix called back. Come on out, hands visible, gun in the holster. We'll settle this in the street like gentlemen. Jake knew it was a lie. The moment he stepped outside, Delacroix's men would cut him down from 4 different angles, but it would get them away from Mrs. Henderson, and maybe, just maybe, he could take Delacroix with him when he went down. He was halfway down the stairs when he heard the sound he'd been hoping, firstly the rapid drumming of hoofbeats, from multiple horses approaching at full gallop. Through the front window, he could see dust rising from the east road. Boss, one of Delacroix's men called out urgently. Riders coming in fast. Delacroix spun to look, and Jake saw his face change as he recognized the distinctive uniforms of the Texas Rangers. 3 of them, riding hard with more dust clouds visible behind them suggesting additional riders not far behind. Change of plan, Delacroix snarled. He turned back toward the boarding house and raised his gun, no longer interested in maintaining any pretense of a fair fight. Kill Morrison now! But Jake was already moving. He dove through the front window in an explosion of glass and wood, rolling as he hit the porch and coming up with his gun drawn. His first shot took down the nearest gunman before the man could even react. The street erupted in gunfire. Delacroix's remaining men scattered for cover, but they were caught in the open, exposed and confused by the sudden arrival of the Rangers. Jake found himself behind Mrs. Henderson's water trough, wooden sides thick enough to stop most bullets, while lead flew over his head from multiple directions. The Rangers reached the edge of town and immediately assessed the situation. The lead rider, a tall man with steel-gray hair and the bearing of a career lawman, raised his rifle and fired with the precision of long experience. Another of Delacroix's men spun and fell. This is Texas Ranger Thomas Whitmore, the lead rider shouted over the gunfire. Marcus Delacroix, you're under arrest for the murder of David Whitmore and numerous other crimes. Surrender now. Instead of surrendering, Delacroix turned and ran for the alley behind the boarding house, where Jake could see he had a horse waiting. The gunslinger was abandoning his men and making a run for it, but not before accomplishing his primary objective. As Jake watched in horror, Delacroix changed direction mid-run, heading not for his horse but toward the Mexican quarter of town. Toward Elena's house. Toward Ayanna. Jake broke from cover, ignoring the bullets that cracked around him, and gave chase. Behind him, he could hear Ranger Whitmore shouting orders to his men, but Jake couldn't wait for backup. Every second counted now. Marcus Delacroix was going to try to take Ayanna as a hostage, and Jake was the only one close enough to stop him. The final confrontation was about to begin, not in the main street at noon as planned, but in the narrow alleys of the Mexican Quarter, where innocent people could be caught in the crossfire, and a desperate man with nothing left to lose might do anything to escape justice. Jake ran harder, his boots pounding against the dusty ground, his heart hammering with fear, not for himself, but for the Apache woman who had shown him what it meant to fight for something worth dying for. He only hoped he wouldn't be too late. Ayanna was helping Elena prepare bandages for the wounded. They could hear the gunfire from the main street, when the back door of the small adobe house burst open. Marcus Delacroix stood in the doorway, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled, his cold gray eyes wild with the desperation of a cornered animal. "Get up," he snarled, pointing his gun at Ayanna. "You're coming with me." Elena stepped protectively in front of her young friend. "Leave her alone, Delacroix. Your fight is with the law now, not with her. My fight is with anyone who tries to take what's mine." He grabbed Elena's shoulder and shoved her aside, sending the elderly woman stumbling against the wall. "Move!" Ayanna helped Elena regain her balance, her eyes never leaving Delacroix's face. "Where are you taking me?" "Away from here. Away from those rangers and their questions." He gestured impatiently with his gun. "There's a back trail through the hills that leads to Mexico. You're going to be my guarantee that nobody follows too close. I won't go." Delacroix's laugh was harsh and bitter. "You don't have a choice, darling. You never did." He moved closer, and Ayanna could smell the sweat of fear on him beneath his usual cologne. "Your precious cowboy is probably dead by now anyway, so there's nothing left to fight for." "He's not dead." The voice came from the doorway behind Delacroix. Jake Morrison stood there, his gun drawn, his blue eyes steady despite the blood trickling down his face from a bullet graze along his temple. Delacroix spun around, his own weapon swinging toward Jake, but he kept Ayanna between them as a human shield. "How nice of you to join us, Morrison. Saves me the trouble of hunting you down later." "Let her go, Delacroix. Your quarrel is with me. My quarrel is with anyone who interferes with my business. But you're right about one thing. This is between you and me." Delacroix's voice took on the silky tone Jake had heard him use before. "Tell you what, cowboy. One last challenge. You and me, fair and square, right here and now. Winner takes the girl." "No more games," Jake said firmly. "The Rangers are here." "It's over, is it?" Delacroix pressed his gun against Ayanna's temple, making her gasp. "Because from where I stand, I'm the one holding all the cards. You make one wrong move, Morrison, and she dies. The Rangers make one wrong move, and she dies. Seems to me like the game's just getting started." Jake felt sweat beading on his forehead. He was a good shot, but not good enough to risk Ayanna's life on a quick draw with Delacroix holding her so close. One missed shot, one moment of hesitation, and the woman he loved would pay the price. "What do you want?" he asked. "Safe passage to Mexico. A horse, and a head start before anyone follows." Delacroix's grip on Ayanna tightened. "Simple enough terms. And then you'll let her go?" "Eventually, maybe, when I'm sure I'm safe." Jake knew that was a lie. Delacroix would never release his only advantage, and once they crossed into Mexico, Ayanna would disappear forever into a world where Delacroix's money and connections could buy anything, including silence. "There's another way," Ayanna said quietly. Both men looked at her in surprise. "The locket," she continued, looking directly at Jake. "Elena gave me Sarah Whitmore's locket. Her testimony is inside it. Everything about her husband's murder, about Delacroix's methods, about the witnesses he paid to lie." Delacroix's face went pale. "You're bluffing, am I?" Ayanna reached slowly into her dress pocket, her movements careful and deliberate. "Would you like to read her words? How you poisoned David Whitmore with bitter almond extract. How you threatened her until she agreed to accept your challenge. How you had the coroner's report destroyed. That's impossible. Sarah Whitmore is dead. No, she's not. She's been hiding in El Paso for 3 years, waiting for someone brave enough to bring her testimony to light." Ayanna's voice grew stronger. "And now Ranger Whitmore has it. Even if you kill Jake, even if you kill me, the truth will come out. Jake saw the change in Delacroix's expression, the calculation, the growing realization that his carefully constructed empire was crumbling around him. A desperate man was dangerous, but a desperate man with nothing left to lose was potentially suicidal. Then I guess I have nothing left to lose, Delacroix said, his voice dropping to a whisper. If I'm going down, I'm taking both of you with me. His grip on his gun shifted, and Jake saw the exact moment when Delacroix made his decision. The gunslinger was going to kill Ayanna out of pure spite, then try to take Jake down in the confusion that followed. But Ayanna saw it too. As Delacroix's finger tightened on the trigger, she threw herself sideways with all her strength, breaking free of his grip and giving Jake a clear shot. The two guns fired simultaneously. Jake's bullet took Delacroix center mass, spinning him around and sending him crashing into Elena's wooden table. Delacroix's shot went wide, embedding itself harmlessly in the adobe wall. For a moment, the small room was filled with gun smoke and silence. Then Delacroix tried to raise his gun for one last shot, but Jake was already moving. He kicked the weapon away and knelt beside the fallen gunslinger. Marcus Delacroix looked up at him with eyes that were already beginning to glaze. "Should've minded your own business, cowboy." "Maybe," Jake replied quietly, "but then I wouldn't be the man she deserves." Delacroix tried to say something else, but the words were lost in a rattling breath. The most feared gunslinger in 3 territories died on the floor of a small adobe house, brought down not by superior skill or faster draw, but by the simple courage of people who refused to let evil go unchallenged. Jake turned to find Ayanna helping Elena to her feet. The old woman seemed shaken but unharmed, and when their eyes met across the room, Jake saw something in Ayanna's expression that made his heart soar. Relief, gratitude, and something deeper that would need words to express properly. Outside, they could hear voices approaching, Ranger Whitmore and his men, having followed the sound of gunshots to their location. "It's over," Jake said, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to Ayanna, to Elena, or to himself. "No," Ayanna replied, moving to stand beside him. "It's just beginning." Through the doorway, Jake could see the Texas Rangers taking control of the situation, rounding up Delacroix's surviving men and restoring order to the town. But his attention was focused entirely on the Apache woman at his side, whose courage and intelligence had not only saved her own life, but had brought justice to crimes that might otherwise have gone unpunished forever. The sun was directly overhead now. It would have been noon, the time originally set for their fateful gunfight. Instead, it was the moment when their real lives could finally begin. One month later, Jake Morrison sat on the porch of his newly purchased ranch, watching Ayanna tend to the garden she had planted behind the house. The land wasn't much, just a small spread with good water and enough grass for a modest herd, but it was theirs, bought with the reward money from Delacroix's capture and the gratitude of several communities that had suffered under the gunslinger's tyranny. The wedding had been a simple affair, conducted by Father Miguel in the little church that served both the Mexican quarter and the Apache families who had settled near San Antonio. Elena had stood as matron of honor, while Sheriff Burkhart had served as Jake's best man. Even Ranger Thomas Whitmore had attended, finally able to put his brother's murder to rest. "The corn is coming along well," Ayanna called out, brushing dirt from her hands as she walked toward the porch. "Elena says we should have a good harvest if the rains hold." "Speaking of Elena," Jake said, pulling a letter from his shirt pocket, "this came for you today. Fort Worth postmark." Ayanna opened the envelope carefully and read the contents, her expression growing more serious with each line. When she finished, she sat down beside Jake and handed him the letter. "Sarah Whitmore wants to meet me," she said quietly. "She's coming to San Antonio next week to testify at the trial of Delacroix's surviving men. She says she wants to thank the woman who gave her the courage to speak the truth." Jake read the letter, noting the careful handwriting and the evident emotion behind the words. "She's been carrying that burden for 3 years. Must be quite a relief to finally let it go. I keep thinking about what might have happened if she hadn't left that testimony with Elena. If she had just run away and never looked back. But she didn't," Jake pointed out. "Even in her fear, she made sure the truth would survive. That took courage." Ayanna leaned against his shoulder and Jake wrapped his arm around her. In the distance, they could see the small herd of cattle they had purchased with their remaining money. Not enough to make them rich, but sufficient to build a life on. Jake? Yes? Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't stood up to Delacroix that day? If you had just walked away? Jake considered the question seriously. Every day, he admitted. And every day I'm grateful I didn't. Some things are worth fighting for even when the odds are against you. Even when you're scared? Especially when you're scared. Fear means you understand what you might lose. Courage means you fight anyway. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun begin its descent toward the western horizon. The heat of the day was giving way to the cooler evening breeze, and somewhere in the distance, they could hear Elena's laughter as she played with the children from the settlement. There's something else, Ayanna said eventually. A letter came for you too, but I wasn't sure if you wanted to talk about it. She handed him an official-looking envelope with the seal of the Texas Rangers. Jake opened it and scanned the contents, his eyebrows rising in surprise. They're offering me a position, he said. Ranger Whitmore says they need men who understand justice isn't always found in law books. What did you tell them? I haven't answered yet. Wanted to talk to you first. He looked at her seriously. It would mean travel, danger, time away from home. But it would also mean helping people who can't help themselves the way we helped each other. Ayanna was quiet for a long moment, considering. My people have a saying, the strength of the wolf is the pack and the strength of the pack is the wolf. You saved me, Jake, but I think maybe I saved you too. How do you figure? You were a good man living a quiet life, helping where you could but not really changing anything. Now, she gestured toward the letter. Now you have the chance to make a real difference. And you'd be all right with that? The uncertainty, the separations. Ayanna smiled, the radiant smile that had captured Jake's heart from the very beginning. I married a man who faced down the most dangerous gunslinger in 3 territories to protect a woman he barely knew. Did you think I expected a quiet, predictable life? Jake laughed and pulled her closer. When you put it that way. Besides, she continued, Elena has been teaching me about healing, about midwifery. If you're going to be traveling around helping people, you might need someone who can patch up wounds and deliver babies. You want to come with me? Try to leave me behind. As the sun set over their small ranch, painting the Texas sky in shades of gold and crimson, Jake Morrison and his Apache wife began planning their future together. It wouldn't be an easy life. There would be danger, hardship, and challenges they couldn't yet imagine. But they would face it together. 2 people who had learned that the greatest courage comes not from facing down enemies with guns, but from choosing to stand up for what's right, even when it would be easier to look away. In the distance, a coyote howled at the emerging stars, and somewhere in the settlement, a guitar began playing a gentle melody, the sounds of the West, wild, free, and full of possibility. Just like the life that stretched out before them, as endless and promising as the Texas sky itself.